Hi, seventh grade. It's Miss D'Angelo here, ready to take you through your first major writing circ of the year. So, every time that you are expected to write a circ, you are going to be expected to write in a certain way. You will use this skill now and all the way through high school and into college. So let's take it slow. Remember, since this is a video, you can pause it at any time and review or work on your paper. So, what is the first thing that you do when you write a circ? Well, we write the claim. The claim is probably one of the easiest parts of the circ. So let's go through it and I will show you using the crush what I'm going to mirror. In other words, I'm going to mirror what your uh, prompt is using circ. You are going to be using ribbons. So the claim says, title in italics or quotes for our short texts. You're going to need to tell me the author, restate my prompt, and then briefly answer it. So, what does that look like? Well, I would encourage you to use this kind of this graphic organizer, especially the first time you write a circ for me. So our prompt asks us, after reading ribbons, what is the universal theme? Now, if you remember, you did a theme tracer, so you have a lot of information that you will need to use for this prompt already in that theme tracer. And that is what I did. I went back to the theme tracer and I found my theme statement. And so let's start. In the story, The Crush, the author by Cynthia Reliant, the theme developed is that, and I wrote my theme statement, generous acts often produce positive changes. I would suggest now that you have this up on the screen and you go in there and write yours for ribbons. Next, we want to write the evidence. So right away, because this is a one paragraph circ, you are going to go right into your evidence. So we have our claim. What we need to do though is make sure that we give background before each text evidence. We want to make sure that it is not repetitive when you write evidence, that you have two different pieces of text evidence, and that when you give your evidence, you give it in chronological order from the text, meaning in time order. And it needs to be direct evidence that supports the claim. So let's take a look at what that evidence looks like for our theme. Now, I have generous acts often produce positive changes. So, what I'm going to want to do is show the generous acts. So, I'm looking for evidence that proves generous acts and then also proves how these generous acts produced positive changes in the characters in my story. So, I wrote, first you need to come and give background from the story. Now, you can use either one of these prompts if you're one of those people like me who likes to have something to at least get me started. So I'm going to write in the story. So I chose this prompt here and I'm going to write in the story. And then I talk about what is going on in the story when this text evidence is happening. So I said, in the story, generosity is first shown when Jack, a college student who works at Ernie's home, kindly takes Ernie's to the Harry's diner every week. Now, again, I go back here because now I'm looking for the exact evidence, and you can use any of these or even this one that I wrote. The narrator states, And now you put in your direct evidence. Jack had decided to take Ernie downtown for breakfast every Wednesday morning to ease him into the world outside of that group home. So if I were you, I would pause right now and do this first piece of text evidence before we get into the analysis. And that because that is going to help you. Now, the next thing you're going to do is probably what seems to be the most difficult part, and that is the reasoning or analysis for your piece of evidence. So, after you have given the evidence, you have to write in your own words and give inferences that clearly explain not only why the evidence supports your claim, but then also go beyond the text and give your opinion. I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like. So I can't just say this. I also have to explain how this evidence here supports generous acts that produce positive changes. So the first thing I'm proving is the generous acts. And what I say is that this evidence shows Jack's generosity because, and that's the biggest reason here, is that because always helps you out. He was not required to take Ernie to the big boy restaurant. He chose to. Jack saw Ernie's potential to function outside of the group home and took it upon himself to adjust by taking him to breakfast, help him adjust by taking him to breakfast each Wednesday. So, in my own words, I'm explaining how this showed that Jack was generous by taking Jack to the restaurant. Now, the next part is going beyond the text. This is probably new to you. This is when you give that little bit more that explains your own thinking. So now you're going to give your personal opinion by saying or using one of these stems. So most would agree that one gives their time and when one gives their time and energy to someone expecting nothing in return, that they could be considered generous. So as you see, this has nothing to do with the story. It's a general statement that you're showing that I know this because I would say that most people it would be considered generous. It's not something from the story. So that's what it is, what it means when it says going beyond the text and into your life and your background, okay? And giving a little bit from there. Um, so I'm going to say that I would pause now and go back and write this analysis in your graphic organizer. Now, before we get to the closing, I want to go in and show you again how I'm now going to show how he was generous, but now I'm going to show how that produced positive changes in my next piece of evidence. So, in my next piece of evidence, I give background from my story by saying, as the story continues, Jack's act of generosity results in lasting and positive changes. So, this is the other part of my theme statement. As Ernie gradually becomes comfortable in the restaurant and even develops a crush on Dolores, who worked in the hardware store. So, now I'm going to talk about how Jack taking him to the restaurant resulted in a positive change in Ernie. And it says in the text, their first time in the big boy, Ernie was too nervous to eat. Dot, dot, dot. This is an eclipse, which means there was too much text evidence. So I had to take some of it out. The third time, he not only ate everything on his plate, but he lifted his head and looked out the window of the Big Boy restaurant towards Stan's hardware store across the street. So this is showing that the first time they went, he couldn't even eat. And then the third time, he ate everything and was also keeping his head up. So now again, I'm going to have to show or talk about in my own words how this showed that Jack's act of being generous had a positive impact on Ernie. And then I'm going to again go beyond the text and write about my own opinion or my own inference or my own background using using one of these stems. So I put, as a result of Jack's generosity, resulted in positive changes for Ernie as he gradually became more comfortable when out in public and away from the group home. He even developed a crush and brought flowers to Dolores every Wednesday while at breakfast with Jack. So that definitely proved, in my personal opinion, that a positive change happened for Ernie. Now, to go beyond the text, I said, one would imagine that for a mentally challenged adult to lose the only person who cared for them would be devastating. Yet when someone like Jack takes the time to help them move beyond their grief and learn to adjust to the real world is not only generous, but it has a possibility to create lasting changes for them. So that's just talking about the entire community in general. So anyone, when you do an act of kindness, like similar to that, it could have a lasting change on someone. So now we're going to pause. I suggest you go back and fill in this graphic organizer and then go back and let's look at the closing. So in the closing, you want to restate your claim. You want to word it differently than the actual claim in your introduction and kind of recap a little bit. So what does that look like? Well, to conclude, or you could say as stated above, the theme of the crush is prevalent throughout and reminds us all that it takes time to complete generous acts of kindness. They are precious and often result in lasting positive changes for both the giver and the receiver. Okay? Once again, your primary focus on this circ is going to be to really be able to put in the text evidence and write the analysis. Once we finish this, I will show you tomorrow how to simply put this into a paragraph and get it ready to send to Miss D'Angelo. Thank you and good night.